Hello painting students, this is your first graded painting activity. Before we get started, we just need to make sure that you have the correct materials. I like to use either a flat, or this is called a bright style brush, so it's flat but it's shorter. Or if you have one that has an angled edge, that's helpful. And then also it's good to have a round brush handy too to get some of the smaller details. You also want to have the primary colors, so again, yellow, red, and blue. It doesn't necessarily matter what brand you're using. However, there are different warm and cool versions of all of these colors. So the ones we're using right now say primary yellow on them, primary blue, and primary red. If you don't have that, that's okay. You just want to find one that doesn't, for instance, red, that doesn't look too much like purple or too much like orange. You want to find one that's kind of a happy medium in between. You also want to have white and black, and we'll show you what that's for later. Again, doesn't matter what brand. You're also going to need some water, a paper towel napkin, and some type of palette. Now, you guys should have your own palette, so if you want to use this, is fine. I'm just using a paper palette, and you can even use magazine pages as well if you just want something disposable. Okay? So we're actually going to complete this in sections. The first section we're going to do is yellow to yellow-orange to red-orange to red. And there's a reason why we're not going to go in this direction, or we're going to go the whole way around, and you'll hopefully see that in a little bit. The beginning's really easy. You can just start with your primary yellow or your regular yellow that you have, and you can see I kind of poured that already. And then you'll gradually add just a tiny bit of red to that as you go. Okay, so just a drop of red, and I'll get that yellow-orange, a little more, I'll get orange, a little more even, and I'll get one that's more to the red side of orange, so that's called red-orange. And then for red, we'll just use straight red out of the tube. Okay, and there's a reason why we'll stop there, and we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. But my advice would be to do it in that order from light to dark, and then once you've completed that section carefully, then double back, and we'll start here on the tint, which is yellow plus white. So I then pour a little bit of white on my palette, make sure that I have a pure yellow, not one that's mixed in like this. And it always makes sense to start with your lighter of the two colors. So for instance, if we were making a tint of yellow, you know, which color is lighter? Is it the white or the yellow? I know yellow is very light, but white's even lighter than that. So you always want to start with your lighter of the two. So I've got my white, got my tiny little drop of yellow, okay, and then I would just add tiny little bit of yellow to the white until I get a desired effect for that. And so we'll kind of show you how that works here in a second. So I'm not going to show you the whole process from yellow to red, but just a little bit just to show you kind of what I'm expecting in terms of quality. So I'm starting with my bright bristle brush, which has a flat edge, and just straight yellow. And put it on a little too thick, so you can always take a little bit off your brush, even on your paper towel as you go. And try to stay in the lines. This is kind of a good practice. And as you come to the edge, if you have a hard time with that, you can always break out the round brush and try to get the details there. So I'm going to move on to the next part. So I'm going to add a little red to that. You could see I already kind of started doing that, and even a little water to get what I would consider to be the yellow-orange. Now notice I don't call it orange-yellow. You always start with the primary in the name. So it's yellow-orange. So that's just a orange that is light because there's a little more yellow in it than red. Okay, and again, I'm not being super careful, but you get the idea. Okay, and then we'd fill that completely. We'd go to the next one, orange, so you'd add just a little more red to that even. You can kind of see how that starts to get a little darker. I'm not going to fill it the whole way in because I don't want to waste your time. And then this is red-orange, so you get even more. Okay, you can kind of see the idea. And then finally for red, you're going to make sure your brush is really clean because you're just using the straight up red for that. You're not going to mix that with any yellow. You don't want any residue on your brush from the yellow, or it'll look orange again, and you don't want that. Okay, so again, this is about as far as we're going to do to start, and I do want you to try to get right up to the edges and nice like that, not like that. This is just to kind of show you the idea. And then once we're done with that, we're going to kind of start way back at the beginning and do the tints, which is just white mixed with each of these colors, and work our way around. Okay, so we're going to proceed with some tints. So again, starting with white, could add a little bit of yellow to that to get a nice light colored yellow. Some people call this like a canary yellow. And that, maybe even a little. At this point, you probably want to clean your water out too, which I did not do, but okay, so in that section that says tint, you can see, I'm not sure if the video is showing this well, but it's a nice, creamy, lighter version of that. Some people call it a Naples yellow. Some call it a canary yellow. Okay, and then with that, if you're satisfied with that, if you need another layer, go ahead and do that, but if you're satisfied with that, you can just continue to mix a batch of white and yellow and then add a little bit of, if you still have a little orange left, you can throw that in there. This is going to look sort of like a creamsicle color. And that is going to be your tint of yellow-orange. I'm not going to fill this in the whole way because I don't want to bore you here, but you know the idea. You want to make that look as neat as possible. Then you're going to throw a little bit more red into it. Okay, and that will be your tint. Maybe a little more white too, a little water. That'll be your tint of orange, and again, you're gonna make that look a little nicer than that. And then for red orange, we're gonna throw a little more red even than that. And this, some people call salmon, this color, so it's like a red-orange plus white. So it's not quite pink. It's got a little bit of orange in it. So that's like a salmon color. So that's going to be your tint of your red-orange. One of my favorite colors. Salmon. Okay, and then the tint of red, you probably guessed it, is pink. So for that one, we want to make sure there's absolutely no orange or yellow in our brush. Clean that out real good. And make sure you're working with just straight red and white. And that's going to be a familiar color, pink. Okay. And they don't, I know we're just learning this, they don't all have to be exactly the same value. When what I mean by value is how light or dark they are. But as you get better at painting, that's a good exercise too, is to try to get them all to be the same lightness or darkness as they go around. Okay, so that's where we're going to stop with tints. Okay, we're about to start the shades, which is the color mixed with black, and you want to be super careful for this section that you don't get any white in with what you're mixing, okay? Because white and black, we'll find out a little later, is gray. And so when you mix gray with a color, it's not a tint and it's not a shade. It's actually something else. It's called a tone. We're really not going to get into that now because it's a little complicated. So you want to make sure there's no white near what you're mixing. So I put a little bit of black on my palette. I'm going to throw a little more yellow, just because my yellow kind of got messed up. But I feel like I got enough red left to probably make my oranges and make my pure red, so I'm okay. If I need more, I can always put it in there. Okay, so again, make sure you're working with a really clean brush. At this point, you probably want to wash your, get your fresh water as well, okay? So we're going to start with yellow. It takes tiny, 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 tiny bit of black to change this, so you don't even need like a whole drop, just like a little bit. And you'll notice right away that it really dramatically changes that color. And yeah, yellow is kind of one that, it's not a real pretty color. It's not a real pretty shade when you add black to it, but it is sometimes necessary for shadows to use it. So we're gonna go ahead and mix that. You could see already it almost has a green quality to it, like an olive green quality to it when you add black. Okay, so we can just kind of add more orange to that, or a little bit of red as we go to make that go along with that. So I'm just going to kind of clean my brush here, snag a little bit of that orange that I mixed earlier, or even a little bit of red if that's not doing the trick. Kind of get the next little bit more black. Make sure I don't get any white in there. Okay. Okay, so again, it's a shade. It's a darker version of that color. Okay, a little more red even than that. Kind of orange shade. And again, I'm not going to go make this super neat just because I don't want to waste your time, but you get the idea that these start to change and make it look a little bit more like a brown or a neutral color. All right, a little more red. Okay. And that would be your red-orange. Probably could add a little less black to that, but you get the idea. And then for red, remember red, you want to make sure that your brush is completely cleaned out and it's just pure red. Just a tiny, tiny bit of black with that. Okay. Again, I'm going to not make that super neat because I don't want to waste your time, but hopefully you get the idea of how that looks like a darker version of red. So once we've completed that section, now we're ready to move on to the next one. So we've done a little over a third of our color wheel from yellow all the way to red. Now there's two ways you can do this next. We got two more sections to go. So we can either go now from yellow to green, and actually we could probably go yellow to green to blue green and then even to blue. Or we could approach now red to red violet to violet to blue violet to blue. Okay, so either one of those sections would be fine. So it's going to be kind of two more sections that we're going to have to do separately the same way, but you want to go from light to dark. So this is from light to dark. This is also from light to dark. So I'm going to go ahead and start with red to blue. I don't need any of the colors that I used already, so I'm not tempted to mess this up. I'm just going to fold my palette in half and just use the back of it. If you have a plastic palette, this might not be a bad time to go clean that out. I got fresh water because I don't want any of that orange getting into when I start mixing those violet colors. Okay, so new paint, we're going to need straight red because that's going to mix to create our red-violet. So we're going to need straight red, maybe even a couple small little dabs of that. And we're going to need blue. So I'm going to put a little bit here, then I'm going to mix to create the violet, but then I'm going to just put some that I'm going to just use for the straight blue section there. Okay? So, red-violet. We got red. We're always starting with the lighter of the two colors. So red is lighter than blue. We're adding just a little bit of blue to that. Tiny bit. Okay, and it'll give us like a red-violet, which a lot of people call crimson. So it gives us our crimson color. So that's the next step of the color wheel. Now, as you can guess, we're probably going to use less red and more blue for the next part to give us our straight violet color. Again, I should be a little more neat than I am right now, but I'm just trying to do this quickly. So a little more blue to this. And that's a nice violet. You can call it purple, same thing. They're not two separate colors, they're just the same color, two different names. So as we're putting that in, we're thinking next we're going to be adding more blue to that even to create a blue-violet color, which is going to come next, and some people call that indigo. So I'm adding a little water, more blue, a little more red. Okay, so this is going to be like a blue-violet. Again, some people call this color indigo. And you'll see when we add white to it later that it becomes what's called periwinkle, which is a really beautiful tint of indigo. And the more you do this kind of thing, I know it seems so simple, but it's really not. And the more you do it, you're just going to get better and better. And when you want to mix your own colors for your own artworks, you're going to know how, and that's the point. Okay, so when we get the blue, just like when we were at red, you don't want any of the residue from the red in with it, okay? Just like we didn't want any of the orange in with it when we did the red. So I'm going to clean my brush out completely, make sure that it's dry, and I'm just going to use that straight blue for the blue section. Okay? Now, I don't want to go through every single step of the tints with you in the shade since I already did that with this section. But you get the idea. You would, again, use your red-violet and you'd add a little white to it to create your tint of that here. You'd add a little more blue, you'd add a little more blue, and then eventually you would wash your brush out and just do a baby blue, a sky blue that would be right there, which would just be blue plus the white. You'd then go back to the beginning again, start with your red-violet, and get your shade of that mixed with black. Then add a little more blue to that with the black, a little more blue, and it'll start to get darker. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so you can see we're back, and I did the tints of the baby blue and of the indigo, which I told you was like a periwinkle color, and then of the violet and red-violet. So next up is doing the shade for those. Okay, so as you can see, I'm almost done with the shades too, just doing the last one with blue and black. Just keep in mind what I told you before, that when you do the shade, you want to make sure you're nowhere near the white paint, because we don't want it to be a shade of gray. It's just got to be the color with a little bit of black. So I've used the red and the blue together in combination with the black to get these shades. Now for this one, I'm going to clean my brush and just make sure it's blue with a tiny bit of black to finish this off. And then we'll proceed to this again. We'll go from yellow to green, and that will finish off our color wheel. And at the bottom of it, where you can see the black and white, we call that a grayscale. It's a little easier than the color wheel, and we will do that to finish this sample worksheet off. Okay, at this point you want brand new clean water again. Probably even get a brand new paper towel because you don't want to get any of those other colors on it. And my palette, oh boy, that is looking bad, but I can probably fold it and still get away with using this section. If you're using a plastic one, you probably just want to clean it out at this point. And so now we're in the section that's going to be from yellow to yellow-green, green, blue-green, and that'll finish us off. So the two colors we need are your primary blue and your primary yellow, and you're always going to need a little more of that lighter color than the darker one, and you kind of want to just get in the habit too of always starting with your light color and adding dark to it, because you'll use far less paint than if you were going to try to do that in reverse. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to add just a tiny bit of water. Start with our yellow, like I said. Make sure your brush is clean, and a tiny bit of green to that. See, that's even too much. That's actually like the regular green shade. Might even save that for later. So we'll just keep adding more yellow to it over there, and now I've got my next two. So I've got my yellow green and my green. Okay, like a lime green. Beautiful color. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and put that in here. Hopefully by now you can see why we didn't just go the whole way around the wheel. This is just so much easier to go from yellow to red, then clean up and go from red to violet to blue, and then come back to the other side and do that. All right, so we got that in there. Clean the brush off. Get that regular green. Okay. You get the idea. We'll come back and you'll see how I've finished this. Okay, so you can see I'm almost done at this point. I got the tints. Now it's moving on for the final shades. So just added white to each of these colors to get that section. So the color wheel itself is actually really done at this point. We've got the hue circle, which is just the regular colors, the tint one, and then the shade, and that's complete. So what's left is this grayscale at the bottom. Okay, and for this you're just gonna need straight up black and white. I got a brand new clean palette, new water, made sure the brushes were good. You need absolutely no colors. You just need black and white. And the same rule applies, that you always want to start with the lighter of the two. So what do you think we're going to start with, black or white? Of course we're going to start with white. Okay, so a little water on that brush. Ooh, dirty brush. And we're just going to paint right over top of that rectangle. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just kind of getting a little practice creating value, so lightness and darkness, with how much of the black and white we add to get a different shade of gray. Okay, so white is at the end, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to add a little bit of black to that. Get a very light shade of gray. And the idea is to try to keep these as equidistant to each other as possible. So if you get, you know, like 3 or 4 in, you're like, you know what, it got really dark really fast, or it stayed really light for a long time and then it got dark all of a sudden, then you might want to go back and adjust some of these. So there's that. I'm going to add a little more black. I think I might have added a little too much. We'll see. So you can always go back in. Okay. Give that a shot. A little darker. Again, I'm not super worried about staying in the lines, but whatever you can do to practice precision is going to help you down the road. Okay, so we're going to add a little bit more black to that even. feel like I'm getting a little dark too quick, but it's kind of hard to judge that until you get a little farther. So at this point, this is really kind of supposed to be our medium gray, but it's a little darker than it should be, but you get the idea. Add a little more black to it. Now, I'm not going to be real stingy about this, but when I was in college, we had to do this, and we had to really make sure that it was an equal distance from each tone to get a correct grayscale. But this is just practice. Okay, and you can see black, we're just going to kind of end with black, so we would put some, create an in-between shade, but you get the idea. So we're going to go from white to black and everything in between. So I'd probably spend another 5 minutes going back into these and trying to make them a little more equidistant and accurate. So if you do all of that, the primary hue, the tints, the shades, and the grayscale, then this assignment is complete. You'll want to take a good picture of it. I would suggest using your phone to upload the picture for this, just so you get a better quality picture. Make sure it's in good lighting, and then you'll upload that to the team's assignment. All right, good luck.